The smell of gardenias always reminds me of funerals, so when I walked into my grandmother's memorial service and caught that sickly sweet scent mixed with cheap perfume, I should have known trouble was brewing. My brother Marcus stood near the casket with his wife Delilah, her hand resting dramatically on what looked like a barely there bump beneath her black dress. She caught my eye and smiled that practiced smile she'd perfected since marrying into our family 2 years ago, the kind that never quite reached her eyes. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What I didn't expect was for her to corner me by the guest book, whispering urgently about morning sickness and missed periods while dabbing at perfectly dry eyes with a tissue. What I really didn't expect was to find her pregnancy test photos posted all over social media before we'd even left the cemetery, complete with captions about carrying on Grandma Rose's legacy and how blessed she felt to be expanding the family during this time of grief. But what absolutely blindsided me was the lawyer's phone call 3 days later, informing me that someone had contacted the estate claiming there was a pregnancy in the family that needed to be considered in the will's distribution. Apparently, my grandmother's trust had a clause about great-grandchildren born within a year of her passing receiving an additional inheritance portion. A clause I'd helped draft when Grandma Rose was planning her estate, thinking it would encourage my cousins to finally settle down. I never imagined it would be weaponized against me by someone who'd been faking ultrasound photos with stock images from pregnancy websites. The morning after the lawyer's call, I sat in my kitchen staring at Delilah's Instagram feed over coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. She'd posted another ultrasound image, this one claiming to be 8 weeks along, with a caption about how Grandma Rose was watching over her precious great-grandbaby from heaven. The comments were flowing in from relatives I barely recognized, congratulating her and Marcus on their miracle blessing during such a difficult time. My phone buzzed. Marcus calling. "Sage, did you see Dell's posts? We wanted to tell everyone at the service, but it didn't feel appropriate with the grieving and all." His voice carried that slightly defensive tone he'd developed since marrying her, like he was always prepared for an argument that hadn't started yet. I kept scrolling through her feed, noting how the ultrasound photos all had conveniently blurred clinic information and dates that seemed to shift depending on which post you looked at. "Congratulations," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "When's the due date?" "March sometime. Dell's been so sick she can barely keep track of the appointments. You know how it is." I didn't know how it was, actually, but I made appropriate sister-in-law noises while screenshotting her posts. Something about the timeline felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on it yet. Marcus chatted for a few more minutes about baby names and nursery colors before hanging up, leaving me alone with my suspicions and a growing pile of digital evidence that didn't quite add up. That afternoon, I drove to the cemetery where we'd buried Grandma Rose just 4 days earlier. The flowers were already wilting in the October heat, and someone had left a small teddy bear propped against the headstone. I had a feeling I knew who. Grandma Rose had been the anchor of our family, the woman who'd raised Marcus and me after our parents died in a car accident when I was 12. She'd built a small fortune through careful investments and a successful catering business, always promising that everything she'd worked for would go to her grandchildren who needed it most. The trust was complicated, designed to provide for education, home purchases, and yes, any great-grandchildren who might come along. I'd spent countless evenings helping her organize the paperwork, never thinking twice about that particular clause. Grandma Rose had always talked about great-grandchildren with such hope, wondering if she'd live to see the next generation. She'd passed away peacefully in her sleep at 87, just 3 months after being diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The funeral had been beautiful. Family members had flown in from across the country, sharing stories about her famous peach cobbler and the way she never forgot a birthday. Marcus had given a touching eulogy about how she'd taught him to tie his shoes and balance a checkbook. Delilah had sobbed loudly in the front row, requiring Marcus to leave his spot twice to comfort her. Now, sitting on the bench beside her grave, I wondered if those tears had been rehearsed too.
My phone rang. The estate attorney, Harold Brimley, whose voice carried the weight of 40 years practicing probate law. Sage, I've received some additional documentation regarding the pregnancy claim we discussed. Mrs. Marcus Thornton has submitted medical records and is requesting an expedited assessment of the inheritance modification clause. We'll need to schedule a meeting with all parties involved. What kind of medical records? I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew. Pregnancy confirmation, ultrasound images, a letter from his physician. Standard documentation for this type of claim. However, I do want to discuss the timeline with you. The clause specifically states children born within 12 months of the decedent's passing. We'll need to verify conception dates to ensure eligibility. After we hung up, I sat there watching the sunset behind the oak trees that bordered the cemetery. Grandma Rose loved those trees, always talking about how they'd stood there for over a century, weathering storms and drought, and still producing acorns every fall. She taught me that patience was a virtue, but so was knowing when to act. I pulled out my phone and started making a list. If Delilah wanted to play games with Grandma Rose's memory and my inheritance, she was about to discover that I'd learned more than just estate planning from our family matriarch. The morning after the lawyer's call, I sat in my kitchen staring at Delilah's Instagram feed over coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. She'd posted another ultrasound image, this one claiming to be 8 weeks along, with a caption about how Grandma Rose was watching over her precious great-grandbaby from heaven. The comments were flowing in from relatives I barely recognized, congratulating her and Marcus on their miracle blessing during such a difficult time. My phone buzzed. Marcus calling. Sage, did you see Dell's posts? We wanted to tell everyone at the service, but it didn't feel appropriate with the grieving and all. His voice carried that slightly defensive tone he'd developed since marrying her, like he was always prepared for an argument that hadn't started yet. I kept scrolling through her feed, noting how the ultrasound photos all had conveniently blurred clinic information and dates that seemed to shift depending on which post you looked at. Congratulations, I said, my voice carefully neutral. When's the due date? March sometime. Dell's been so sick she can barely keep track of the appointments. You know how it is. I didn't know how it was, actually.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It was a small lie, probably meaningless, but it sat wrong with me. If Delilah was lying about something that trivial, what else was she fabricating? I drove to the pharmacy anyway, buying a bag of ginger chews and using the trip as an excuse to swing by Marcus and Delilah's apartment. They lived in a trendy complex downtown, the kind of place with exposed brick walls and monthly rent that cost more than most people's mortgages. Marcus had always been financially irresponsible, jumping from job to job and relying on credit cards to maintain a lifestyle he couldn't afford. Delilah, as far as I could tell, worked sporadically as a social media influencer, which seemed to mostly involve posting photos of expensive brunches and tagging clothing brands. Delilah answered the door in silk pajamas and a robe, her hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. "Sage, how sweet of you to bring these. I've been absolutely miserable all morning." She did look pale, I had to give her that, but something about her performance felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced looking sick in the mirror. "How are you feeling about everything?" I asked, settling onto their white leather couch. "The pregnancy, I mean. It must be overwhelming with Grandma Rose passing and now this." Her hand went immediately to her stomach in that protective gesture I'd seen in movies 1,000 times. "It's bittersweet, you know, like she sent us this blessing right before she left. The timing feels so meaningful." "When did you first suspect?" "Oh, you know how it is. I'd been feeling off for a few weeks, but with the stress of Grandma Rose being sick, I thought it was just emotions. Then I missed my period and took a test, and there it was. 2 pink lines." She pulled out her phone, swiping to a photo of a pregnancy test on their marble bathroom counter. I was shaking when I took this picture. Marcus was at work, and I had to wait 4 hours to tell him, longest 4 hours of my life. I studied the image. The test looked legitimate, but something nagged at me. The timestamp showed it was taken 3 weeks ago, but she'd only started posting about the pregnancy after the funeral. Why wait to share such exciting news? Have you told your family yet? A shadow crossed her face. My mom's been dealing with some health issues. We wanted to wait until the first trimester was over before making any big announcements. You know how superstitious she is about these things. It was plausible, but I filed it away with the growing list of details that didn't quite align. After an hour of small talk about baby names and nursery themes, I left with more questions than answers. That evening, I sat in Grandma Rose's house, which I'd been slowly cleaning out over the past month. The attorney had said I could take my time with the personal belongings, but being there felt both comforting and lonely. Her reading glasses were still on the kitchen table next to yesterday's crossword puzzle, half finished. Her coffee mug sat in the sink, unwashed. I'd found her journal a few weeks earlier, tucked away in her bedroom nightstand. She'd written in it sporadically over the years, mostly notes about family events and concerns about money. The final entries, written in the shaky handwriting that came with her illness, were about her hopes for Marcus and me. Sage has always been the responsible one, she'd written, just 2 months before she passed. She'll make sure the money is used wisely. Marcus means well, but he's easily influenced. I worry about him making decisions based on what others want rather than what he needs. She'd been worried about Delilah's influence, though she'd never said it directly, but reading between the lines, it was clear that Grandma Rose had reservations about her grandson's wife. There were references to expensive tastes and grand plans that don't match reality. I was flipping through the journal when I found something that made my blood run cold. A folded piece of paper tucked between the pages, dated just 3 weeks before Grandma Rose died. It was a photocopy of a medical bill from a fertility clinic, with Delilah's name at the top. But it wasn't for pregnancy services. It was for a consultation about fertility treatments, specifically discussing options for someone who'd been trying to conceive for over a year without success. The date on the bill was 6 months ago. If Delilah had been struggling with infertility 6 months ago, how was she suddenly 8 weeks pregnant now without any mention of treatments or medical intervention? I photographed the document and tucked it back into the journal, my mind racing. Either Delilah had experienced a miraculous natural conception after months of fertility struggles, or she was lying about being pregnant altogether. And if she was lying, she was doing it to steal money from my grandmother's grave. The next morning brought another Instagram post from Delilah. This time, it was a photo of prenatal vitamins arranged artfully on their kitchen counter, with a caption about nourishing our little miracle and how Grandma Rose's spirit was guiding her through this journey. The comments were full of heart emojis and congratulations, including several from relatives who were already discussing how the baby would bring the family closer together during this difficult time. I screenshotted that post too, adding it to the folder I'd created on my phone. If this was going to turn into a legal battle, I wanted every piece of evidence I could gather. My phone rang. Harold Brimley again. Sage, I need to inform you that Mrs. Thornton has requested a meeting for next week to discuss the inheritance modification. She's submitted all the required documentation, and frankly, it appears to be in order. Unless you have specific objections to raise, we'll need to begin the process of calculating the adjusted distribution. I'd like to request independent verification of the pregnancy, I said. There was a pause. That's certainly your right, though I should warn you that such requests can be seen as adversarial. Is there a specific reason you're questioning the claim? Call it due diligence. If we're going to modify Grandma Rose's estate based on a pregnancy, I think we should be absolutely certain the pregnancy is legitimate. Very well. I'll arrange for an independent medical examination. Mrs. Thornton will need to provide blood work and undergo an ultrasound with a physician of the court's choosing. Will that satisfy your concerns? It's a start, I said. After we hung up, I sat back in my chair, feeling the weight of what I'd just set in motion. If I was wrong about Delilah, I'd just made myself the villain of the family story. But if I was right, I was about to expose a fraud that dishonored everything my grandmother had worked for. Either way, there was no going back now. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday at Harold's office downtown. I arrived early, settling into the waiting area with its leather chairs and mahogany tables stacked with legal journals. The whole place smelled like old books and expensive coffee, the kind of atmosphere designed to make you feel like serious business was being conducted. Marcus and Delilah arrived exactly on time. She in a flowing dress that emphasized her supposed bump, he in a suit that looked like it had been rented for the occasion. Delilah's face was pale, but her makeup was perfect, her hair styled in soft waves that caught the light from the office windows.
Sage! She embraced me with what seemed like genuine warmth, though I noticed her hands were shaking slightly. Thank you for being here. I know this is complicated, but family is family, right? Harold ushered us into his conference room, spreading papers across the polished table like he was dealing cards. Delilah's medical records were thicker than I'd expected, full of official-looking documents with clinic letterheads and doctor signatures. Mrs. Thornton has provided comprehensive documentation of her pregnancy, Harold began, adjusting his glasses. Positive test results, ultrasound images, physician confirmation, and projected due date. Based on the conception timeline, the child would be born well within the 12-month window specified in Mrs. Rose Thornton's trust. He slid copies of the documents toward me. The ultrasound images looked legitimate, complete with measurements and gestational age calculations. The doctor's letter was written on official letterhead from a clinic I recognized, confirming pregnancy and estimating the due date as March 15th. However, Harold continued, Mrs. Sage Thornton has requested independent verification, which is her right as a beneficiary. Mrs. Delilah Thornton, are you willing to undergo examination by a court-appointed physician? Delilah's smile never wavered, but I caught the quick glance she exchanged with Marcus. Of course, I have nothing to hide, though I have to say, I'm hurt that family would question something so personal and sacred. Marcus leaned forward. Sage, what's this about? Dell's been sick as a dog for weeks. You've seen the posts, the medical records. Why would you put her through unnecessary stress during such a delicate time? I looked at both of them, these people I'd shared holidays and birthdays with, wondering how well I'd ever really known them. Because Grandma Rose's estate is substantial, and the law requires verification for claims like this, it's nothing personal. But it was personal, deeply personal, and we all knew it. The room fell silent except for the sound of Harold shuffling papers and the distant hum of traffic from the street below. The examination is scheduled for tomorrow morning, Harold said finally. Dr. Patricia Wells at the Women's Health Center on 5th Street. She'll conduct blood work and ultrasound imaging. Results should be available by Monday. As we filed out of the office, Delilah caught my arm in the hallway. Sage, I hope you know I don't hold this against you. Grief makes people do strange things, but I want you to know that this baby is going to be so loved by all of us. Grandma Rose would be so proud. Her voice was sweet, concerned, everything a pregnant sister-in-law should be, but her grip on my arm was just a little too tight, her smile just a little too practiced. I drove home through the afternoon traffic, my mind churning with doubts. What if I was wrong? What if Delilah really was pregnant, and I was just a grieving granddaughter looking for someone to blame for the loss of my inheritance? What if tomorrow's examination proved everything I suspected was nothing more than paranoia and jealousy? But as I pulled into my driveway, I thought about Grandma Rose's journal, about the fertility clinic bill, about the inconsistencies in Delilah's timeline. I thought about the way she'd claimed Grandma Rose made ginger candies, the way her ultrasound images never quite showed identifying information clearly, the way she'd waited until after the funeral to announce a pregnancy she claimed to have known about for weeks. Most of all, I thought about my grandmother's handwriting in that journal. Marcus means well, but he's easily influenced. I worry about him making decisions based on what others want rather than what he needs. Grandma Rose had always been a good judge of character. If she'd had reservations about Delilah, maybe I wasn't wrong to have them too. That night, I called Jessica again. The court-ordered exam is tomorrow morning. What exactly will they be looking for? Blood test will show HCG levels, which indicate pregnancy.
Ultrasound will show fetal development, heart rate, size measurements. If she's faking, tomorrow's exam will expose it. There's no way to fake blood work or a live ultrasound. What if she's not faking the pregnancy itself, but lying about other things? The timeline, the father, the circumstances? That's harder to prove medically. Blood work will tell you how far along she really is, within a few days. Ultrasound can confirm dates too. But anything beyond that is going to require other kinds of evidence. After we hung up, I sat in Grandma Rose's kitchen, surrounded by the boxes of belongings I'd been slowly sorting through. Family photos, recipe cards written in her careful script, the china set she'd used for every holiday dinner. Everything that represented a lifetime of love and hard work and careful planning. If Delilah was lying, she wasn't just stealing money, she was stealing the legacy my grandmother had spent decades building, the future she'd envisioned for the family she'd raised and loved. But if I was wrong, if my suspicions were nothing more than grief and jealousy talking, then I was about to destroy relationships that could never be repaired. Marcus would never forgive me for questioning his wife's pregnancy. The rest of the family would see me as the bitter sister who couldn't stand to share her inheritance. I picked up one of Grandma Rose's photo albums, flipping through pages of Christmas mornings and birthday parties, school graduations and wedding days. There was Marcus at his high school graduation, proud and hopeful. There he was again on his wedding day, Delilah radiant and white beside him, both of them looking like they believed their love could conquer anything. But there was also Grandma Rose at her kitchen table, paying bills and balancing checkbooks, working late into the night to make sure there would be something left for the grandchildren she'd sacrificed so much to raise. Her hands were always busy, always working, always planning for a future she might not live to see but wanted to secure anyway. She'd trusted me to protect that future. Tomorrow, I'd find out if that trust had been justified. I closed the photo album and went to bed, but sleep was a long time coming. Outside my window, the October wind rattled the last leaves from the oak tree in my backyard. And somewhere in the distance, a clock tower chimed midnight. In 8 hours, I'd know the truth. In 8 hours, everything would change, one way or another. The question was I ready for whatever truth was waiting? The Women's Health Center on 5th Street had the sterile smell of antiseptic and fresh flowers, the kind of place designed to make nervous patients feel at ease, with soft lighting and watercolor paintings of peaceful landscapes. I arrived 20 minutes early, positioning myself in the parking lot where I could see everyone coming and going. Call it paranoia, but I wanted to witness whatever was about to unfold. Marcus pulled up in their silver sedan at exactly 9:45, Delilah emerging from the passenger side in flowing maternity clothes that seemed carefully chosen for maximum visual impact. She moved with the deliberate slowness of someone who wanted the world to notice her condition, one hand pressed protectively to her stomach, the other gripping Marcus's arm for support. I waited until they disappeared into the building before following, taking a seat in the far corner of the waiting room behind a rack of parenting magazines. The receptician checked Delilah in efficiently, handing her a clipboard of forms while Marcus settled beside her, rubbing her back in small, worried circles. "Mrs. Thornton?"
A nurse appeared in scrubs decorated with tiny storks, her voice professionally cheerful. "Dr. Wells is ready for you." Delilah stood slowly, pressing her hand to her lower back with a small wince that seemed just a touch too theatrical. "Marcus, honey, you don't need to come back. This won't take long." He kissed her forehead, whispering something I couldn't hear, and she disappeared through the door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." The waiting room settled back into its quiet rhythm of turning pages and whispered conversations, but I felt like I was holding my breath. 30 minutes stretched into an hour. Marcus checked his phone repeatedly, paced to the water cooler twice, and finally approached the receptionist's desk. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I could see his growing agitation in the tension of his shoulders and the way he kept glancing toward the examination rooms. When Delilah finally emerged, her face was paper white, and there were tears in her eyes, real tears this time, not the carefully orchestrated ones from the funeral. She moved quickly toward the exit without making eye contact with anyone, Marcus hurrying to catch up. "Del, what happened? What did the doctor say?" Her response was too quiet for me to hear, but whatever she told him made his face go slack with shock.
They left without scheduling a follow-up appointment, without stopping at the billing desk, without any of the normal procedures you'd expect after a routine prenatal visit. I waited another 10 minutes before approaching the receptionist myself. "Excuse me, I'm Sage Thornton. I believe Dr. Wells was conducting an examination for the probate court regarding my family's estate." The woman consulted her computer, her expression professionally neutral. "Dr. Wells will be providing her report directly to the court as requested. I'm sorry, but I can't share any patient information." Of course, I just wanted to confirm that the appointment took place. "Mrs. Delilah Thornton was seen this morning, yes. The court should receive Dr. Wells' findings within 48 hours. I thanked her and left, my heart hammering against my ribs. Whatever had happened in that examination room had shattered Delilah's carefully constructed facade. The question was whether she'd confess the truth or double down on the lie. I didn't have to wait long for my answer. By the time I got home, Delilah had already posted on social media. Not her usual polished Instagram photos, but a raw, emotional Facebook post that looked like it had been typed through tears. Sometimes life throws you curveballs that test your faith in ways you never imagined. Marcus and I have been dealing with some scary complications with our pregnancy, and we're asking for privacy and prayers during this difficult time. The stress of the last few weeks has taken a toll, and we need to focus on our health and our marriage right now. Please respect our need for space as we navigate this challenging journey." The comments section was immediately flooded with concern and support from friends and family members who had no idea they were being manipulated. "Praying for you both. Everything happens for a reason. You're so strong, staying positive during this hard time." Marcus had shared the post with his own caption, "My wife is the strongest woman I know. Whatever challenges we're facing, we'll get through them together. Family means everything." I stared at the screen, recognizing the setup for what it was. They were preparing for a miscarriage narrative, laying the groundwork to explain away the pregnancy when the medical examination inevitably exposed their fraud. It was actually brilliant in its simplicity. People would be so focused on offering sympathy for their loss that no one would question the timing or ask uncomfortable questions about the inheritance claim. But I wasn't going to let them get away with it that easily. I called Harold Brimley, catching him just as he was leaving for lunch. "Harold, I need to know the exact timeline for Dr. Wells' report. When will we have the results?" She promised the findings by Monday morning. Why? Has something happened? Delilah and Marcus are already posting on social media about pregnancy complications. I think they're preparing to claim a miscarriage if the medical examination didn't go as planned. There was a long pause. That would be unfortunate. However, blood work doesn't lie, and ultrasound technology is quite advanced. If Mrs. Thornton was pregnant this morning, Dr. Wells would have documented evidence. If she wasn't, that would also be clearly established in the medical record. What happens if they try to withdraw the inheritance claim before the report comes out? Too late for that, I'm afraid. Once we initiated the court-ordered examination, the process has to be completed. The court will want to see Dr. Wells' findings regardless of what Mrs. Thornton decides to do going forward. After we hung up, I sat in my grandmother's kitchen, surrounded by the familiar comfort of her things, trying to process what I'd set in motion. Part of me felt guilty for doubting someone who might genuinely be experiencing pregnancy complications. But the larger part of me, the part that had spent years watching Grandma Rose work 2 jobs to put Marcus and I through college, knew that some things were worth fighting for. I opened my laptop and began documenting everything I'd observed over the past weeks. The inconsistent timeline in Delilah's social media posts, the fertility clinic bill I'd found in Grandma Rose's journal, the way she'd claimed knowledge about family recipes that didn't exist, the suspicious timing of her pregnancy announcement, the dramatic shift in her social media narrative after this morning's examination. If this was going to court, I wanted every piece of evidence organized and ready. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Can we talk? Something's come up with Dell's pregnancy. I think there's been a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding. That was one way to put it.
He was already there when I arrived, slumped in a corner booth with his hands wrapped around a coffee cup, like it was an anchor keeping him tethered to reality. "She lost the baby," he said without preamble as I slid into the seat across from him. "This morning, during the examination. Dr. Wells said it happens sometimes. early pregnancies, especially with stress. I studied his face, looking for signs of deception or doubt, but all I saw was genuine grief. Either Marcus truly believed what he was telling me, or he was a better actor than I'd given him credit for. "I'm sorry," I said, and part of me meant it. Even if Delilah had been lying, Marcus was clearly in pain. That must have been devastating. "She's been bleedier since this morning. Dr. Wells said it was a natural miscarriage, probably happened sometime in the last few days, but Dell didn't realize because the symptoms can be subtle." He looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I know you had doubts about the pregnancy, but this isn't something you can fake. We saw the blood work results. She was pregnant, Sage. Our baby was real." My stomach twisted with a mixture of guilt and confusion. Had I been wrong about everything? Had my suspicions driven me to torment a woman who was genuinely experiencing one of life's cruelest losses? "What did Dr. Wells say about the inheritance claim?" I asked gently. Marcus's expression darkened. "She said the court would have to decide how to handle it. Technically, there was a pregnancy conceived after Grandma Rose's death, even if it didn't result in a live birth. The legal implications are complicated." We sat in silence for several minutes, the coffee shop's ambient noise washing over us like white noise. Somewhere behind the counter, an espresso machine hissed and gurgled. A group of college students debated philosophy over textbooks and energy drinks. Normal life continued while our family dealt with loss upon loss. "I want you to know I don't blame you for requesting the examination," Marcus said finally. "You were protecting Grandma Rose's legacy. I get that. But Dell is really hurting right now, and she feels like you never trusted her. Maybe when this is all over, when the legal stuff is settled, we can find a way to heal as a family." I nodded, guilt washing over me in waves. But as we parted ways in the parking lot, something still nagged at me. The timeline felt wrong. The story too convenient, the resolution too neat. Maybe Marcus was telling the truth as he understood it, but that didn't mean Delilah was. That evening, I called Jessica again. "Hypothetically, if someone wanted to fake a miscarriage to cover up a fake pregnancy, how would they do it?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Sage, please tell me you're not going where I think you're going with this. Just humor me. Is it possible?" "Medically, there are ways. Someone could use hormone supplements to temporarily elevate HCG levels, enough to show positive on blood work. But it would be dangerous and require pretty sophisticated knowledge of reproductive endocrinology, and they'd need to time it perfectly to coincide with the examination." "What about the bleeding Marcus mentioned?" "Could be induced artificially. Certain medications, even some herbal supplements, can cause bleeding that mimics miscarriage symptoms. But again, we're talking about someone with medical knowledge and access to specific substances. It's not something you could improvise." After we hung up, I sat staring at my laptop screen, cursor blinking in a blank document. Either I was the worst kind of person, doubting a grieving woman's tragic loss, or I was dealing with someone far more calculating and dangerous than I'd given him credit for. The answer came on Sunday morning, delivered in the most unexpected way possible. I was at Grandma Rose's house, continuing the slow process of sorting through her belongings, when I found a box of old photo albums in her bedroom closet. Mixed in with the family pictures were medical records, insurance papers, and a stack of letters from various doctors dating back decades. Grandma Rose had been meticulous about keeping health records, probably a habit from raising 2 grandchildren alone and needing to track immunizations and emergency contacts. At the bottom of the stack, I found something that made my blood run cold. A letter from a reproductive endocrinologist, dated just 18 months ago, addressed to Mrs. Delilah Thompson, not Delilah Thornton. Thompson, her maiden name. The letter was thanking her for participating in a clinical trial studying fertility treatments and confirming that she completed the full course of hormone therapy. It also noted that participants should expect irregular menstrual cycles for several months following treatment and advised against attempting pregnancy during the adjustment period. I read the letter 3 times, trying to process what it meant. Delilah had undergone fertility treatments 18 months ago under her maiden name, treatments that would have given her detailed knowledge of reproductive hormones and their effects on the body. She would have known exactly how to manipulate HCG levels, how to time hormone spikes, how to create the appearance of pregnancy and subsequent miscarriage. More importantly, the letter was addressed to Grandma Rose's house, not to Marcus and Delilah's apartment, which meant she'd been using my grandmother's address for medical correspondence, probably to hide the fertility treatments from Marcus? But why would the letter have ended up in Grandma Rose's personal papers instead of being forwarded? I called Harold Brimley at home, apologizing for bothering him on a weekend, but explaining that I'd found new evidence that might be relevant to the case. "What kind of evidence?" he asked, his professional caution evident even over the phone. "Medical records suggesting that Delilah underwent fertility treatments that would have given her the knowledge and means to fake both pregnancy and miscarriage. I also found a fertility clinic bill in my grandmother's things that contradicts the timeline she's provided. Bring everything to my office first thing Monday morning. We'll need to review it before Dr. Wells submits her report. If there's evidence of fraud, we'll need to involve law enforcement." Law enforcement? The word sent a chill through me. This wasn't just about money anymore. If Delilah had deliberately frauded the estate, she could be facing criminal charges. I spent the rest of Sunday organizing every piece of evidence I'd collected, creating a timeline that showed the inconsistencies in her story. The fertility struggles documented 6 months ago, the treatments she'd hidden from her husband, the perfectly timed pregnancy announcement immediately following a death that triggered inheritance clauses, the convenient miscarriage that occurred during the court-ordered examination. Each piece alone might have been explained away, but together they painted a picture of calculated deception that spanned months of planning. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that matched my mood as I drove to Harold's office with the folder of evidence that would either vindicate my suspicions or destroy what was left of my family relationships.
Harold reviewed everything methodically, making notes in his precise legal handwriting and occasionally asking clarifying questions about dates and sources. When he finished, he leaned back in his leather chair and removed his glasses, polishing them with the deliberate care of someone buying time to think. "This is compelling circumstantial evidence," he said finally, "but we'll need Dr. Wells' report to corroborate your theory. If she found no evidence of pregnancy during Friday's examination, combined with what you've discovered, we'd have grounds to pursue fraud charges. And if she did find evidence of pregnancy, then Mrs. Delilah Thornton experienced a tragic but legitimate miscarriage, and you'll need to decide how to repair the damage this investigation has done to your family relationships." We didn't have to wait long for the answer. Dr. Wells' report arrived by courier at 10:30, a thick envelope sealed with the official stamp of the Women's Health Center. Harold opened it with the careful precision of someone defusing a bomb, spreading the pages across his desk like pieces of a puzzle. I held my breath as he read, watching his expression shift from professional neutrality to surprise to something that looked like anger. "Well," he said finally, looking up at me with grim satisfaction, "it appears your instincts were correct. Dr. Wells found no evidence of current pregnancy, no fetal tissue, no elevated HCG levels, no physiological signs of recent conception. Mrs. Thornton was not pregnant on Friday morning, nor had she been pregnant at any recent point." The relief was so overwhelming I had to grip the arms of my chair to keep from sliding onto the floor. So she lied about everything. "It appears so," Dr. Wells also noted that Mrs. Thornton became extremely agitated during the examination, insisting that she'd miscarried just that morning and demanding to know why the blood work wasn't showing pregnancy hormones. When Dr. Wells explained that miscarriage doesn't eliminate HCG from the system for several days, Mrs. Thornton became verbally abusive and attempted to leave before the examination was completed. Harold flipped through the pages of the report. Dr. Wells also documented what she described as theatrical behavior consistent with malingering, and noted that the patient seemed unusually familiar with medical terminology related to pregnancy and miscarriage. She's recommending a full investigation into possible fraud. I thought about Marcus, sitting in that coffee shop with genuine tears in his eyes, describing the loss of a baby that had never existed. Does Marcus know? That's going to be the difficult part. We'll need to contact law enforcement before approaching any family members. This is now a criminal matter involving attempted fraud of an estate worth several $100,000. Mrs. Thornton will need to be formally interviewed and possibly arrested. The word arrested hit me like a physical blow. Whatever I thought would happen when I started investigating Delilah's pregnancy, I hadn't imagined it would end with handcuffs and criminal charges. I'd wanted justice, not destruction. What happens next? I asked. I contact the district attorney's office and turn over our evidence. They'll decide whether to pursue charges. In the meantime, the inheritance claim is obviously invalidated, and the estate will be distributed according to the original terms of your grandmother's will. As I left Harold's office, my phone was already buzzing with notifications. Delilah had posted another update on social media, this one accompanied by a photo of herself in a hospital gown, looking pale and vulnerable. Thank you to everyone who has reached out during this difficult time. The doctors say these things happen for a reason, even when we can't understand why. Marcus and I are leaning on each other and our faith as we process this loss. We know our angel baby is with Grandma Rose now, watching over all of us. The comments were an outpouring of sympathy and support. You're so strong. Everything happens for a reason. Your baby is in heaven with Grandma Rose. Reading them made me feel sick. Delilah wasn't just stealing money. She was manipulating the genuine emotions and grief of people who cared about her, turning their love into weapons in her elaborate deception. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated how much I loved my grandmother and how far I'd go to protect her legacy. The next 24 hours unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of legal procedure and family drama. The district attorney's office moved quickly, probably because estate fraud involving substantial sums tends to get priority attention. By Tuesday afternoon, Detective Maria Santos had contacted me to schedule an interview and review the evidence I'd collected. Detective Santos was a compact woman in her 40s with intelligent eyes and the kind of calm professionalism that comes from years of dealing with people at their worst. She listened to my story without interruption, taking notes and asking precise questions about dates, documents, and conversations. "This is thorough work," she said, reviewing my timeline and evidence folder. "You've essentially built our case for us. The question now is whether Mrs. Thornton will confess when confronted or try to maintain the deception." "What about Marcus? My brother had no idea this was happening. We'll need to interview him as well, but based on what you've told me, he appears to be another victim rather than a co-conspirator. His wife used his grief over your grandmother's death and his desire for children to manipulate him into supporting her fraud." The interviews were scheduled for Thursday morning. Marcus and Delilah would be asked to come to the station separately, ostensibly to provide statements about the inheritance claim for the probate court. Neither would know that criminal charges were being considered until they were confronted with the evidence. Wednesday night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Marcus discovering that his wife had not only lied to him about being pregnant, but had used his love and trust to commit fraud against his own family. I thought about Delilah, who had apparently planned this deception for months, carefully timing every element to maximize her chances of success. Most of all, I thought about Grandma Rose, who had worked so hard to leave something meaningful for the grandchildren she'd raised. She'd trusted the legal system to protect her wishes and her family to honor her memory. Instead, she'd gotten manipulation, lies, and greed. But she'd also gotten me. And I wasn't done fighting for her yet. Thursday morning dawned bright and cold. The
the kind of crisp October day that makes you think of new beginnings and fresh starts. I arrived at the police station early, positioning myself in the visitor parking lot where I could observe without being seen. Marcus arrived first, looking confused and slightly annoyed as he approached the building. He'd clearly dressed for what he thought was a routine legal appointment, wearing plants and a button-down shirt that looked hastily pressed. He disappeared through the front doors with the resigned air of someone fulfilling an unwelcome obligation. Delilah arrived 20 minutes later in full performance mode. She moved slowly, one hand pressed to her stomach, the other clutching Marcus's arm for support. She had chosen her outfit carefully, a loose black dress that suggested ongoing grief, minimal makeup that made her look pale and fragile, and flats instead of heels to emphasize her supposed physical weakness. Even from a distance, I could see her taking deep breaths and composing herself before entering the building.
It was like watching an actor prepare for the performance of her career, not knowing that the audience was already aware it was all an act. My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Santos. Marcus interviewed and released. Delilah still in progress. We'll contact you when complete. I waited in my car for another hour, watching other people come and go about their normal business while my family's drama unfolded behind the station's institutional walls. A part of me wondered if I was doing the right thing. Another part of me knew that Grandma Rose would have handled it exactly the same way. Finally, Detective Santos called. We're done here. Mrs. Thornton has been arrested and charged with attempted fraud, forgery of medical documents, and filing false claims with the probate court. She's being processed now. Did she confess? Eventually. She tried to maintain the pregnancy story at first, but when we presented the medical evidence and the documents you found, she broke down. Turns out this wasn't her first attempt at something like this. She tried to fake a pregnancy for insurance fraud in another state 3 years ago, but the case was dropped when she moved away. The news hit me like a punch to the stomach. Delilah wasn't just an opportunistic fraudster taking advantage of my grandmother's death. She was a repeat offender who'd made a career out of manipulating people's emotions for financial gain. What about Marcus? He's devastated, as you can imagine. Learning that his wife faked a pregnancy is bad enough, but discovering she did it to defraud his own family has left him pretty shaken. He asked me to tell you he's sorry he didn't see through her lies sooner. After we hung up, I sat in the police station parking lot for a long time, trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. In the span of a few weeks, I'd gone from mourning my grandmother to exposing a criminal conspiracy that had destroyed my brother's marriage and would probably send his wife to prison. But as I drove home through the familiar streets of the town where Grandma Rose had raised us, I felt something I hadn't experienced since her funeral. Peace. Not the peace of revenge or vindication, but the peace of knowing that I'd honored the trust she'd placed in me. Her legacy was safe, her wishes would be respected, and justice had been served. The real work was just beginning. Marcus would need support as he navigated divorce proceedings and rebuilt his life. The family would need time to heal from the revelation that someone they'd welcomed into their circle had been systematically deceiving them. And I would need to find a way to move forward without the anger and suspicion that had driven me for the past month. But all of that could wait. For now, it was enough to know that Grandma Rose's story would end the way she'd written it, not the way someone else had tried to rewrite it through lies and manipulation. Sometimes the truth is worth fighting for, even when it costs you everything you thought you knew about the people you love. And sometimes protecting the dead is the most important thing you can do for the living. The local newspaper ran the story 3 days later, buried on page 6 between ads for roofing services and upcoming community events. "Woman charged in estate fraud scheme," read the modest headline, followed by a brief paragraph outlining the basic facts without mentioning names or specific details. But in a town where everyone knew everyone else's business, anonymity was impossible. My phone started ringing at 7 in the morning. Family members and friends who'd seen the article were heard whispers at the grocery store and church. Aunt Patricia called first, her voice tight with disbelief. "Sage, please tell me this isn't about Marcus and that girl." "I can't really discuss the details while it's an active case," I said, which was the truth, but not the whole truth. "But yes, it involves the inheritance claim." That poor boy, first losing Rose, now finding out his wife is a criminal. What's he gonna do? I'd been wondering the same thing. Marcus had been staying at a motel near the highway since Thursday, too ashamed to face family and too angry to go home to the apartment he'd shared with Delilah.
He'd sent me a single text message. "Thank you for seeing what I couldn't. I'm sorry I didn't believe you." The custody of their shared life was being sorted out by lawyers now. Delilah had been released on bail but was prohibited from accessing their joint accounts or removing property from the apartment. Marcus had filed for emergency divorce proceedings citing fraud and emotional abuse. Their fairy tale marriage was being dismantled piece by piece, reduced to legal documents and property division. But the hardest part was yet to come. The family gathering that nobody wanted, but everybody needed. Aunt Patricia insisted on hosting Sunday dinner, the first time we'd all been in the same room since Grandma Rose's funeral. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. We were gathering again to deal with another kind of death, the death of trust and innocence, and the comfortable illusion that we really knew the people we loved. I arrived early to help with preparations, finding my aunt in her kitchen surrounded by the familiar chaos of cooking for a crowd. She was making Grandma Rose's pot roast recipe, the one that had anchored every family celebration for as long as I can remember. "I keep thinking about how proud Rose was at Marcus's wedding," she said, not looking up from peeling potatoes. She kept saying how happy she was that he'd found someone who made him smile. We all believed it. How did we miss the signs? "There weren't really signs to miss," I said, taking over the vegetable prep. "Delilah was good at being what people wanted her to be. That's what made her dangerous." Marcus arrived just as the roast was coming out of the oven, looking like he'd aged 5 years in the past week. His usual easy smile was gone, replaced with a wariness that broke my heart. He hugged me stiffly, whispering, "I'm sorry," against my shoulder like a prayer he'd been repeating for days. The dinner conversation was stilted, everyone carefully avoiding the obvious topic while failing to find anything else to talk about. Finally, Uncle Robert set down his fork and addressed what we were all thinking. "We need to talk about what happened. Not the legal stuff, but what it means for us as a family. We let someone in who nearly destroyed Rose's legacy. We need to figure out how to move forward." Marcus pushed food around his plate without eating. "I know you all think I was stupid for not seeing through her lies. Hell, I think I was stupid. But she was convincing. The pregnancy tests, the morning sickness, the doctor appointments. She had answers for everything." "She was a professional," I said quietly. "This wasn't her first time running a scam like this. You couldn't have known." "But I should have listened when you raised concerns. I was so desperate to believe in something good after losing Grandma Rose that I ignored every red flag." He looked around the table at faces that reflected various degrees of sympathy, anger, and confusion. "I let my grief make me vulnerable, and she used that against all of us." Cousin Sarah, who'd flown in from Denver for the dinner, leaned forward. "What happens now? With Delilah, I mean."
"Is she going to prison?" "Her lawyer is trying to negotiate a plea deal," I said. "Restitution, probation, community service. But the district attorney wants jail time because of her previous attempts at similar fraud. It could go either way." "Good," Uncle Robert said grimly. "She deserves whatever she gets. Using Rose's memory to steal from her own grandchildren is about as low as it gets." The conversation continued for another hour, touching on practical matters like changing locks and security codes, emotional issues like rebuilding trust, and legal questions about protecting the estate from future manipulation. But underneath it all was a deeper current of loss, the recognition that our family had been changed in ways that couldn't be undone. After dinner, Marcus and I found ourselves alone on the back porch, watching the sun set behind the trees that bordered Aunt Patricia's property. The October air was crisp with the promise of winter, and somewhere in the distance we could hear children playing in neighboring yards. "I keep thinking about the baby," Marcus said suddenly. "I know it was never real, but for those few weeks, I believed I was going to be a father. I picked out names, started looking at cribs online. Imagine teaching a kid to ride a bike in Grandma Rose's driveway. The grief I felt when I thought Del miscarried was real, even if nothing else was." I didn't know what to say to that. How do you comfort someone who's mourning a loss that was entirely fabricated by the person they trusted most? The worst part is wondering what else she lied about. Did she ever really love me? Or was I just a means to an end? Were any of our moments together genuine? Or was she always calculating how to use me for the next scam? "I don't think we'll ever know," I said honestly.
But that doesn't mean you should doubt your own capacity for love or trust. What she did says nothing about you and everything about her. He was quiet for a long time, staring out at the darkening sky. Detective Santos told me there might be other victims, other men she targeted before me, other families she tried to defraud. They're looking into it as part of the investigation. The news didn't surprise me, but it still sent a chill through me. Delilah hadn't stumbled into fraud accidentally. She'd built a career out of exploiting people's most vulnerable emotions, their grief and hope and love, turning those feelings into weapons against them. I want you to know that I don't blame you for exposing her, Marcus continued. I was angry at first when you requested the medical examination. I thought you were being vindictive or jealous. But you saved me from something much worse. If she'd gotten away with this, who knows what she would have tried next? We sat together as full darkness fell, two siblings trying to make sense of a betrayal that had shattered more than just financial trust. Somewhere in the house behind us, our family was cleaning up dinner dishes and probably continuing the conversation we'd started at the table. They were good people, people who'd rallied around Marcus despite his poor judgment, and supported my decision to investigate even when it seemed cruel. Grandma Rose had raised us to value family above everything else, but she'd also taught us that sometimes protecting family meant making hard choices. Tonight, I felt like I'd passed a test I never wanted to take. The court proceedings stretched through the winter months, a series of hearings and depositions and plea negotiations that kept the wound from fully healing. Delilah's lawyer painted her as a troubled woman driven to desperate acts by financial pressure and mental health issues. The prosecutor countered with evidence of premeditation and a pattern of similar crimes dating back years. I testified twice, once about finding the fertility clinic records, and again about the inconsistencies in Delilah's timeline. Sitting in that witness box, looking across the courtroom at someone who'd eaten at my grandmother's table and called me sister was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. But every time I wavered, I remembered Grandma Rose's hands counting out bills at her kitchen table, working late into the night to make sure her grandchildren would have something to build their lives on. Marcus testified too, his voice steady, as he described how Delilah had manipulated his grief and desire for children to support her fraud. The man who had once defended her against all criticism now spoke with clinical detachment about her lies and manipulations. In the end, Delilah pled guilty to charges of fraud, forgery, and filing false documents with the court. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison, 3 years of probation, and restitution for all legal fees incurred during the investigation. Her lawyer had hoped for probation only, but the judge noted that this was her third conviction for fraud-related offenses and that she'd shown no genuine remorse for her actions. The day of her sentencing, I sat in the back of the courtroom next to Marcus, watching as the woman who had once been our family's golden girl was led away in handcuffs. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the orange jumpsuit and the weight of consequences she could no longer manipulate or charm her way out of. I thought I'd feel more satisfied, Marcus said, as we walked out of the courthouse into the spring sunshine, but mostly I just feel empty. I understood what he meant. Justice had been served, but it felt hollow compared to what we'd lost. Not just money or property, but innocence and trust, and the comfortable belief that people were generally what they appeared to be. The inheritance was finally distributed according to Grandma Rose's original wishes 6 months after her death. Marcus received his portion with appropriate gratitude, but little enthusiasm. Money couldn't repair what Delilah had broken in him, the confidence in his own judgment and his ability to trust his heart. I used part of my inheritance to establish a scholarship fund in Grandma Rose's name, something that would help other students the way she'd helped Marcus and I when our parents died. It felt like the right way to honor her memory, creating something positive from the ashes of betrayal and deception. The family slowly found its way back to something resembling normal. Sunday dinners resumed their regular rhythm. Birthday celebrations and holiday gatherings gradually lost the shadow of scandal that had hung over them. Marcus started dating again, cautiously, with the hard-won wisdom that comes from having your trust shattered and rebuilt. But we were all different now. marked by the knowledge that evil can wear a familiar face and speak in a loving voice. We'd learned that protecting the people we love sometimes means becoming the villain in someone else's story, that doing the right thing doesn't always feel good, and that some battles are worth fighting, even when victory tastes like ash. A year later, I was cleaning out the last of Grandma Rose's belongings when I found her final journal entry, written just days before she died. Her handwriting was shaky, but her words were clear. I hope Sage knows how proud I am of her strength. She has the backbone this family needs, the courage to do what's right, even when it's hard. Marcus is a good boy, but he needs someone to watch out for him. I trust Sage to protect what we've built together. Reading those words, I finally understood that everything I'd done, all the investigating and confronting and testifying, hadn't just been about money or justice, or even protecting Grandma Rose's legacy. It had been about honoring the trust she'd placed in me, living up to the strength she'd seen in me even when I couldn't see it in myself. Delilah served 14 months of her sentence before being released on good behavior. She moved to another state, probably to start fresh with a new identity and new victims. I never saw or heard from her again, and I was grateful for that small mercy. Marcus rebuilt his life slowly, but steadily, eventually meeting and marrying a woman who valued honesty above charm and substance above performance. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl, who would grow up knowing their great-grandmother only through stories, but carrying her values forward nonetheless. As for me, I kept Grandma Rose's house, unable to part with the place where I'd learned so many of life's important lessons. I turned her sewing room into a home office and her garden into a small memorial space where family could come to remember her properly. Sometimes when I'm working late at night in that familiar kitchen, I can almost feel her presence, approving and watchful and proud. She'd fought her whole life to build something lasting for the people she loved, and in the end, that's exactly what she'd done. Not just the money or property she'd left behind, but the values and strength she instilled in the grandchildren she'd raised. The truth had cost us dearly, but it had also freed us from a lie that would have poisoned everything it touched. In the end, that was Grandma Rose's final gift to us: the courage to face hard truths and the strength to survive them. Some stories don't have happy endings in the traditional sense. People don't ride off into sunsets or live happily ever after. But sometimes they have true endings, honest endings that honor the people we love and protect the things that matter most. Sometimes that has to be enough. And sometimes, when you're sitting in your grandmother's kitchen on a quiet evening, surrounded by the life she built through hard work and love and sacrifice, it feels like more than enough. It feels like home. 2 years after Delilah's sentencing, I thought the nightmare was finally behind us.
Marcus had started therapy, begun dating someone new, and was slowly rebuilding his life. The family had found its rhythm again, gathering for holidays without the shadow of scandal hanging over every conversation. I'd even begun to believe that we'd learned our lessons and grown stronger from the experience. Then, Detective Santos called on a Tuesday morning in March, her voice carrying the weight of news I didn't want to hear. "Sage, we need to talk. Delilah's been released from prison, and there are some developments you should know about. Can you come down to the station this afternoon?" My stomach dropped. I'd known her release date was approaching, had even received the standard victim notification from the state, but I'd pushed it to the back of my mind. In my optimistic moments, I'd imagined she'd disappear quietly, start over somewhere far away, maybe even genuinely reform her life. I should have known better. Detective Santos met me in the same conference room where I'd first laid out my evidence against Delilah. The space felt different now, less charged with righteous anger and more heavy with weary resignation. "She's been out for 3 weeks, Santos began, sliding a thin file across the table. Initially, everything seemed fine. She reported to her parole officer, found housing in a halfway house, even got a job at a local restaurant. But then we started getting reports." I opened the file, my hands already shaking before I saw what was inside. Phone records, surveillance photos, witness statements, all documenting Delilah's activities since her release.
She's been conducting surveillance on your family, Santos continued, following Marcus to work, parked outside your house at night, asking questions about your routines at local businesses. Her parole officer wasn't aware until a concerned citizen reported a woman taking photos of children at the elementary school where your cousin Sarah's kids attend. The photos in the file made my skin crawl. Long-range shots of Marcus leaving his apartment, of me walking into the grocery store, of various family members going about their daily lives. But the most disturbing were the images of children, Sarah's 8-year-old daughter Emma and 6-year-old son Tyler playing on the school playground. Is she planning something? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. We're not certain, but her behavior suggests she's gathering intelligence for some purpose. The bigger concern is that she's been in contact with someone from her past, another person we suspect was involved in previous fraud schemes. Phone records show regular calls to a number registered to a man named Vincent Carrera, who has his own history of identity theft and financial crimes. I stared at the photos, trying to process what I was seeing. In my mind, prison was supposed to be a place where people reflected on their crimes and hopefully found redemption. I hadn't expected Delilah to emerge more dangerous than when she went in. What can you do about this? Technically, she hasn't violated the terms of her parole. Taking photos in public places isn't illegal, and maintaining surveillance on people who testified against her falls into a legal gray area. But we can increase patrols around your family's homes and businesses, and we've alerted her parole officer to monitor her activities more closely. Santos leaned forward, her expression serious. There's something else. We've been investigating Vincent Carrera in connection with a series of inheritance frauds in neighboring states. The pattern is familiar. Identify wealthy elderly people, infiltrate their social circles or families, then manipulate estate planning or fake relationships to gain access to their assets. The implications hit me like a physical blow. You think they're planning to target another family? It's possible, or they might be planning something more personal, focused on your family specifically. Delilah spent 18 months in prison because of your investigation. People like her don't usually let that go without some form of retaliation. I left the police station feeling like I was drowning in déjà vu. Once again, I was facing a threat to my family that no one else could see coming. Once again, I was the one who had to decide how much to reveal and how hard to fight back. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't just protecting money or property, I was protecting lives. I called Marcus first, reaching him at his office where he worked as an insurance adjuster, a job he'd taken after the divorce to rebuild his life from scratch. "She's out," I said, without preamble, "and she's been watching us." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice hollow. "I knew this day would come. I just hoped she'd move on, find new victims somewhere else. There's more. She's working with someone now, another criminal. The police think they might be planning something bigger." Jesus, Sage. What do we do? I can't go through this again. I'm finally starting to feel normal, to trust people again. I can't handle another round of lies and investigations and court proceedings. I understood his exhaustion, but I also knew we didn't have the luxury of ignoring the threat. We protect ourselves and our family, we stay vigilant, we document everything, and we don't let our guard down until she's either back in prison or permanently out of our lives. The next few weeks felt like living under siege. Every family member received copies of Delilah's photo with instructions to call the police if they spotted her anywhere. We changed routines, varied driving routes, and installed security cameras at key locations. Sarah pulled Emma and Tyler out of after-school activities temporarily, unwilling to risk their safety for the sake of normalcy. The surveillance continued, but Delilah was smart enough to stay just within legal boundaries. She never approached anyone directly, never made threats, never did anything that would constitute harassment or stalking under the technical definitions of the law, but her presence was a constant reminder that our ordeal wasn't over. Then, Vincent Carrera made a mistake. He approached Aunt Patricia at the grocery store, introducing himself as a researcher working on a book about families that overcame tragedy. He was charming, well-dressed, and convincing enough that Patricia agreed to have coffee with him to discuss how we'd dealt with losing Grandma Rose and the subsequent scandal with Delilah. Fortunately, Patricia mentioned the encounter that evening, describing the handsome stranger who'd been so interested in our family's story. She even had his business card, complete with contact information that I immediately forwarded to Detective Santos. Vincent Carrera, Santos confirmed, same man we've been monitoring in connection with Delilah. Approaching your aunt confirms our suspicions that they're planning something specific to your family. What kind of something? Based on his previous crimes, probably identity theft or financial fraud. He specializes in gaining the trust of vulnerable people, often elderly women, then manipulating them into providing access to bank accounts, credit cards, or valuable personal information. I thought about Aunt Patricia, who at 72 was sharp as a tack, but also naturally trusting and generous. She'd been the one to insist on family dinners after the Delilah scandal, the one who'd worked hardest to heal our relationships and restore normal family dynamics. The idea of someone targeting her kindness made me furious. We need to set a trap, I said. Santos raised an eyebrow. What did you have in mind?
The plan we developed was elegant in its simplicity. Aunt Patricia would continue her coffee dates with Vincent, but she'd be wearing a wire provided by the police. Meanwhile, we'd feed her specific false information designed to lure him into making incriminating statements or attempting fraud. The bait was a fictional inheritance from a distant relative, a story about how Aunt Patricia had recently learned she was the sole beneficiary of a trust worth several $100,000. The money was supposedly tied up in probate proceedings, but she expected it to be available within a few months. It was exactly the kind of opportunity that someone like Vincent wouldn't be able to resist. The first wired conversation yielded little beyond Vincent's apparent fascination with our family's financial affairs and his subtle questions about banking relationships and investment strategies. But his interest was clearly piqued, and he began calling Aunt Patricia regularly, always with some excuse to continue their conversations about grief, family, and financial planning. During their third meeting, he made his move. Patricia, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I'm concerned about you handling such a large inheritance on your own. His voice came through clearly on the recording. There are so many predators out there who target people in your situation. Have you considered working with a financial advisor who specializes in estate management? Aunt Patricia, following our script perfectly, expressed uncertainty about who to trust and worry about making the wrong decisions with such a substantial sum. I happen to know someone who might be able to help, Vincent offered smoothly. She's a certified financial planner who's helped several of my research subjects navigate similar situations. Very discreet, very knowledgeable about protecting assets from taxation and legal complications. The financial planner, of course, was Delilah, operating under a false identity with forged credentials. The plan was textbook. Gain access to Aunt Patricia's real financial accounts under the guise of preparing for the fictional inheritance, then drain whatever assets they could before disappearing. But they'd made a critical error in judgment. They'd assumed that our family was still the same trusting, naive group of people who'd welcomed Delilah with open arms 3 years earlier. They hadn't considered that surviving her first betrayal might have taught us to be more suspicious, more careful, and more willing to fight back. The arrest came on a Thursday morning in May, exactly 2 months after Vincent's first approach to Aunt Patricia. Police moved simultaneously on both suspects, catching Vincent at his apartment and Delilah at the restaurant where she'd been working under an assumed name. Vincent's apartment was filled with evidence of their expanded operation: fake business cards, forged financial documents, lists of potential targets they'd been researching, and detailed notes about our family's routines and vulnerabilities. They'd been planning more than just fraud. They'd been preparing for an elaborate revenge scheme that would have destroyed multiple lives. Delilah's arrest violated her parole in spectacular fashion, guaranteeing her return to prison for the remainder of her original sentence plus additional time for the new charges. Vincent faced federal charges for crossing state lines in the commission of fraud, which carried potentially serious prison time.
But the most satisfying evidence was a handwritten journal found in Delilah's possession, filled with angry rants about how our family had ruined her life and detailed plans for getting even. She'd written extensively about her time in prison, how the other inmates had mocked her for being outsmarted by people she considered marks, how she'd spent months planning her return and the sweet revenge she intended to take. She never learned, Detective Santos observed as we reviewed the evidence. Prison didn't teach her to take responsibility for her actions or reform her behavior. It just taught her to be more careful about getting caught. The trials were swift and decisive. Vincent pled guilty to multiple fraud charges in exchange for a reduced sentence, while Delilah chose to fight the charges and lost badly. The jury took less than 2 hours to convict her on all counts, and the judge sentenced her to the maximum allowable time under federal guidelines. This time, there would be no early release for good behavior. This time, she'd be incarcerated long enough that our family could rebuild our lives without looking over our shoulders. Marcus took the news with visible relief, but also a kind of weary sadness that broke my heart. I keep thinking about the person I thought I married. Even now, knowing everything she's done, part of me still mourns the woman who never really existed. That's normal, I said. You're grieving someone real, even if she wasn't who you thought she was. The love you felt was genuine, even if hers wasn't. The family celebration that followed felt different from our previous victory. There was relief, certainly, and satisfaction that justice had been served again. But there was also exhaustion, the bone-deep weariness that comes from fighting the same battle twice and wondering if it would ever truly be over. Aunt Patricia handled her role in the sting operation with characteristic grace, treating the whole experience as an adventure rather than a trauma. I always wanted to be a secret agent when I was younger, she joked at Sunday dinner. Who knew I'd get my chance at 72? But privately, she admitted to feeling foolish for nearly falling for Vincent's charm. He was so convincing, so interested in my thoughts and feelings. It's embarrassing how easily I could have been taken in if you hadn't warned me to be suspicious. That's exactly what made him dangerous, I reminded her. People like him and Delilah are professionals at reading people and giving them what they want to hear. The fact that you recognized something was wrong shows how much we've all learned from this experience. As summer turned to fall, life gradually returned to normal. Marcus began planning his wedding to his new girlfriend named Rebecca, who had been a rock of stability throughout the latest crisis. Sarah enrolled Emma and Tyler back in their regular activities, confident that the threat had been neutralized. I started dating again myself, tentatively exploring the possibility of letting someone new into the life I'd spent so much energy protecting. But the experience had changed us all in fundamental ways. We were more cautious now, less willing to take people at face value, more protective of our personal information and family details. It was a reasonable response to what we'd endured, but it also represented a loss of the innocent trust that had once characterized our relationships. The final chapter came on a quiet evening in November, almost exactly 3 years after Grandma Rose's funeral, where this whole nightmare had begun. I was cleaning out my desk when I found a letter that had been delivered to my office that week, forwarded from the prison where Delilah was now serving her sentence. My first instinct was to throw it away unopened. I'd had enough of her lies and manipulations to last several lifetimes. But curiosity eventually won out, and I carefully opened the envelope, half expecting some new scheme or threat. Instead, I found something unexpected, what appeared to be a genuine apology. The letter was brief and handwritten in the careful script of someone who'd had plenty of time to think about what they wanted to say. Delilah acknowledged the harm she had caused, admitted that her actions had been motivated by greed and entitlement rather than desperation, and expressed remorse for the pain she had inflicted on people who had welcomed her into their family. But the final paragraph was the most surprising to me. I know you have no reason to believe anything I say, and I don't expect forgiveness for what I've done. But I want you to know that your refusal to be deceived probably saved my life in the long run. If you hadn't exposed me, I would have continued down this path until I destroyed myself completely. Prison has given me time to understand how hollow my life had become and how much damage I was doing to everyone around me. I can't undo the past, but I can promise that when I'm released, I'll disappear from your lives forever. Your family deserves peace, and I owe you that much. I read the letter 3 times, searching for hidden meanings or manipulative undertones, but it seemed remarkably straightforward. Either Delilah had become a much better actress during her time in prison, or she was finally telling the truth about something. I never responded to the letter, but I kept it, filed away with all the other documents from our long ordeal. Whether her repentance was genuine or just another performance, it marked the end of a chapter in our family story that had defined too much of our lives for too long. Marcus got married the following spring in a small ceremony in Aunt Patricia's backyard, surrounded by family who'd learned the hard way that love was precious and trust was fragile, and both were worth protecting. Rebecca fits seamlessly into our complicated dynamics, bringing laughter and stability that helped heal wounds we didn't even know we still carried. As I watched my brother dance with his new wife under the oak trees that had sheltered our family gatherings for decades, I thought about Grandma Rose and the legacy she had worked so hard to protect. It wasn't just the money or the property she had left behind, though those had been important. It was the strength and values she had instilled in us, the courage to do what was right even when it was difficult, and the wisdom to recognize that some things were worth fighting for no matter what the cost. The real inheritance wasn't what she had given us, but what she had taught us, that family was worth protecting, that truth was worth pursuing, and that sometimes the people we love most need us to be strong enough to save them from themselves. In the end, that lesson had served us well. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.